Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we are continuing on our topic about Islamic civilization, establishment of Islamic civilization, and how the Quran and the prophetic teachings could influence Muslims to start to think, to establish and build a magnificent civilization. The real factor and the essential factor behind the establishment of Islamic civilization is Quran. Something else, practices of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his teachings, his life, his sayings. The Holy Quran laid the foundation for the scientific methodology based on observation, experimentation, use of mind and senses. Many verses in the Quran talking about the use of mind, the use of senses. Say, go all over the earth and behold how wondrously He has created man in the first instance, and thus too will God bring into being your second life. For verily God has the power to will anything. In Surah Al-Ankabut. Many verses in the Quran talking about this fact. Allah tells us that all knowledge and information that man gains after birth is acquired through ears, eyes, and minds, our senses. God has brought you forth from your mother's womb, knowing nothing, but He has, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all provider, the creator, created us and provided us with all hearing, sight, and minds, so that you might have causes to be grateful. This is in Surah Al-Nahl, and in another surah, in another chapter, Al-Mulk, Allah is talking about the same gift, about the same sign, about reminding people that you actually came to this earth having nothing, no knowledge, no source of knowledge. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will and wisdom that to give and provide humans with all these senses in order to what? To use them, stimulate them, think, investigate, question, travel throughout the universe, and understand the purpose of their life and the purpose of the creation of universe. The Holy Quran established what is called science of research methodologies, guided man towards the methods of research in cosmic sciences to conclude scientific facts and truth. It also emphasized the importance of the experimental deductive approach, which deduce a general rule or scientific law from facts through observation and experimentations. Many historians and scholars of scientific methodology credit the discovery of this approach to the English scientist Francis Bacon, who wrote the famous book, The New Organon, in the modern European Renaissance era. This book, which discussed actually the empirical research approach, came to invalidate Aristotle's Old Organon. That's what has been mentioned by Professor Robert in his book, The Making of Humanity. Now, Roger learned Arabic and Arabic sciences at Oxford School through Andalusian teachers. But Roger Bacon actually has no right to be credited with having introduced the experimental method. Roger was no more than a bearer of Muslim science and methodology to Christian Europe. And he never actually weird of declaring that knowledge of Arabic and Arabic sciences was the only way for his contemporaries to gain true knowledge. Disagreement on the originator of the experimental method is part of the colossal misinterpretations about the origins of European civilization. Science, as has been mentioned by Robert in his book, science is the most momentous contribution of the Arab civilization. And by the way, many European historians use the term Arab civilization. Why? Because the Muslim or the Islamic civilization has originated within the Arabian Peninsula. But non-Arabs and Arabs, all of them, all Muslims and even non-Muslims, all citizens, all inhabitants living in the Arabian Peninsula and in other outside Arabian Peninsula were participating in building the Islamic civilization, have been given equal opportunity to participate in the establishment of Islamic civilization. So the Islamic civilization is diverse by all means and methods. So he said, science is the most momentous contribution of the Arab civilization to the modern world. Its fruits were slow in ripening, not until long after the Moorish culture. Moorish culture refers to the Muslim living in Spain. This term has been used by, again, many historians and many European historians. Moorish means Muslims settled in Spain, had sunk back into darkness, did the giant to which it had given birth to rise in his mind. And then he says, what we call science arose in Europe as a result of a new spirit of inquiry, of a new methods of experimentation, observations, measurement, development of mathematics, in a form of unknown to the Greeks. That spirit and those methods were introduced into the European world by the Arabs. The Holy Quran introduced the discipline of experimental logic. A huge number of its verses stimulate the human mind to observe and reflect on the truth of existence, the universe, and the human soul. Allah Almighty says, say, consider whatever there is in the heavens and on earth. In chapter Yunus, have they never learned to think for themselves? God has not created the heavens and the earth and all that is between them without an inner truth and a term set by him in Surah Ar-Rum. All these verses and many others talking about purposes on this, purposes of life, purposes of creating the universe in such a magnificent order and system. The creation of universe and the creation of humans as well. So because of what? Because not to think? Because just to leave it? Because that's why the Quran is telling them, then have they never learned to think for themselves? Pushing them to think for themselves. Pushing them to question and to ask and investigate about the purpose of their life on this earth. Have they then never considered God's mighty dominion over the heavens and the earth and all the things that God has created? They ask themselves whether perchance the end of their own term might already have drawn nigh. In what other tiding then will they after this believe? In Surah or chapter Al-A'raf. All these verses were knocking very hard on the heads of those people whom they don't use their mind to think. It's by this way the Holy Quran established the scientific mentality through its, of course, continuous calls on what and for what? Reflection. Reflecting, pondering over the universe and the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala greatness in our souls, societies, nations throughout history. This call stimulates minds to explore, search, travel through the universe, deduce its laws, the constant divine laws that never change over time. Allah Almighty created those laws for governing the universe, regulating its course. As Allah Almighty says, such being God's way, which has ever obtained in the past and never will though find any change in God's way. Discovering these laws is the key to building civilization on earth. So, again and again, it is the Quran which motivated Muslims to build civilization. Obviously, one of the greatest purposes of revelation of the Holy Quran is the call for reflection on the universe, a deduction of its concealed laws, a revelation of its secrets, making use of all this knowledge to benefit the entire human race through better ways of life, regardless of their differences. That's why we will see later on in many documentaries which we will watch, how Muslim scholars and scientists were offering their knowledge and science to everyone all over the world, without differentiating between Muslims and non-Muslims, between Arabs and non-Arabs, between black and white. Why? No discrimination. And knowledge based on teachings of the Quran and the prophetic teachings has to be offered to everyone. It's the role of Muslims to teach others, to help others to live a better life, to spread the spirit of knowledge and ilm and science. So the Arab mentality was from that moment liberated from the intellectual shackles of ignorance, superstitions, sorcery, and was released to explore secrets and laws of the universe. Thus, Muslims moved towards conducting experiments, deducing conclusions, armed with all the required prerequisites, theoretical, practical, religious knowledge, and their liberated minds. Muslim scientists were the first to identify the elements of scientific methodology, elements consistent with today's terminology and still in use by today's scholars. They include the types of observation, experiments, pilot studies, control, conclusive experiments, prerequisites of scientific hypotheses, use of scientific imagination in comparing different phenomena and detecting the common unit that links scattered facts. Islamic methodology. Islamic methodology, which has been established by the Quran. Of course, within this atmosphere of liberation of minds, within this atmosphere of continuous call on reflecting, reached its highest levels of reflection, of research, of exploring, of inventing, and defining the relationship between theory and experiment. That's why we see many historians, many scholars, European scholars, emphasized the role of Muslim scientists in establishing the law of theory and experiment, highlighted their clear influence on Roger Bacon, as we said, who claimed himself as the founder of the scientific methodology, which relies simply on experiment as a basis for research in natural sciences. So all these scholars, they mentioned how Muslims were the real founders in this path, and how findings of others were far less valuable than those of the former Arab scholars. It's highly, of course, probable that the discovery of the relationship between theory and experiment is what moved the Islamic civilization from the stage of assimilation to the advanced stage of innovation in the mid-3rd century after Hijrah. However, even during the assimilation phase, we see Arab scientists has significant contributions. They were able to establish the Arabic poetry measurement science. That science studies poetic rhythms. Moreover, they succeeded in developing linguistic and grammatical sciences, contributed to the huge amount of many philosophical terminologies, experimental terminologies, research methodologies, historical methodologies, as well as the science of jurisprudence, a new field of chemistry. They also considered algebra, for example, a separate branch of science and not a branch of mathematics. It was separated branch of science. Developed method to measure, of course, a lot of sciences within the knowledge. Therefore, the Islamic civilization in the Middle Ages was a fundamental chapter in the history of science and civilization. Contributions of Muslim scholars and scientists to the establishment of the scientific approach helped humanity developing new sciences and the branches of knowledge. It's because of that we see Auguste Comte, the founder, of course, of positivism, declaring that Islam did not kidnap minds. As a matter of fact, Islam granted them the freedom to think, foresee, innovate in all, of course, in all branches of knowledge, in all aspects of life, constructional aspects of life. And he added that such a religion deserves to be studied in depth. And when we study the religion of Islam in depth, we will see that the essential factor of motivating Muslims to establish civilization, to change the scene of the entire world at that time during the Middle Ages, was the Quran. Quran, who was keep on insisting and emphasizing the use of knowledge, the value of knowledge and ilm, has been mentioned in many verses in the Quran that closest people to God, to Allah, whom satisfying Allah and pleasing Allah with their deeds and actions, scholars and ulama. Scholars from different branches of knowledge, not necessarily related or limited to religious knowledge. Because Muslims, they did not differentiate between religious and non-religious. They didn't actually fall in that trap to separate any kind of separation or dichotomy between dunya or this life and the hereafter. They go together. So they built bridges based on their understanding of the message of the Quran between these sciences. So as Muslims, the noble Prophet, peace be upon him, applied this scientific approach even in the minute details of his mission and in all interactions with members of society and the state. And that was obvious and demonstrated clearly in his attitude the day his young son Ibrahim died. On that day, there had been a solar eclipse. People started to attribute this cosmic phenomena to the death of the Prophet's son, Ibrahim, for which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, suffered intense sadness. The noble Prophet, peace be upon him, took a logical, scientific stance on this. He uprooted the seeds of superstitions and falsehoods that were far from any sense of logic and reason when he said, the sun and the moon do not eclipse for anyone's death nor for anyone's life. Any leader in his place would take this opportunity and make a certain propaganda for himself. Say that, yes, it's because of the death of my son, but not this leader, not this honest man and leader who was trying continuously to teach people and humanity that honesty, justice, truth are absolute values that we all should practice and protect. So here is the teachings. Here is the practice, the role of practices of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. These Quranic instructions and prophetic attitudes had a great impact on Arab mind, rooted in superstitions and sorcery across long centuries of time. They opened the fountains of science and knowledge. Phenomena, facts, reason filled the Arab minds, pushed them forward to take their place in history. That was not possible at all within just a few years, within that limited period, unless we find that continuous call in the Quran and the practices of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, on reflecting, pondering, contemplating, simulating mind, thinking, investigating, trying to offer the best you can to humanity. The German Orientalist Sigrid Honka says, not only did the Arabs save the Greek civilization, because Arabs, as we will see, or Muslims, saved the Greek civilization. How did they save it? They save it through translation, through adding to this civilization, gifted to the West, and founded the experimental methods in chemistry, physics, algebra, etc. They presented the world with the most precious gift, namely the correct way of scientific research, which paved the way for the West to learn the secrets of nature. And then she continued and said, astronomy had a profoundly religious significance for Muslims. The stars and their orbits, the sun and its greatness, the moon and its motion, were glaring proof of the greatness and power of Allah the Creator, whose the name the Arab prophet was sent advocating that he is the creator of heavens and earth and the maker of darkness and light. It's because of this we see all these inventions in almost every branch of knowledge. Chemistry, algebra, astronomy, medicine, physics, everything, every branch of knowledge. Muslims were considering this as part of their worship to Allah, a very solid part of their faith and iman. They took it as if it's their own responsibility to make this earth and this world a better place for living. Everybody, not just for Muslims. They offered knowledge, they offered science, they opened their territories and lands and universities, as we will see in Muslim Spain, to all people from all over the world, to learn and to teach them and to let them think that this world is not created to be field of war and conflict. It's a field of cooperation, living together, helping one another to make this life on earth a better place for all of us. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi